Once again, it's time to take a trip to 1968. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some cool British singles released in October. Let's begin. October 1968 saw the release of Magic Bus by The Who. Pete Townshend originally wrote the song in 1965, but Townshend felt the song was a bit weak. And as a result, he handed out the tune to a band called The Pudding, who recorded and released the first version of the song in 1967.
I don't care how much I pay. Let's ride the magic bus. I'm driving my bus to my baby each day. Let's ride the magic bus.
The single by The Pudding went completely unnoticed, and it sank without a trace. The Who didn't have any intention of recording and releasing the song. The only reason why they eventually decided to record it was mostly due to the fact that Townshend was taking too much time writing songs for Tommy, and the label demanded a new single. The single got good reviews in the press. Disc Magazine's journalist Penny Valentine wrote,
"It gives me a very warm, satisfying feeling to think that as long as The Who turn out records like this, I can stagger through the remaining 90% of records each week and keep fairly hopeful. This is Townshend at his best. Solid, splendid and mad." The song is a cross between My Generation and Bo Diddley, with castanets and sticks and guitars all raving in at the beginning. If ever there was an instant commercial smash, this is it.
The B-side was this John Entwistle composition, a song which was about Keith Moon's drinking problems. The single reached number 26 in Britain and number 25 in the States.
And now the Jimi Hendrix Experience with their new single, All Along the Watchtower. There must be some kind of way out of here.
October 1968 also saw the release of this excellent Bob Dylan cover by Jimi Hendrix. The song, which was also featured on the album Electric Ladyland, had already been released in the States in September. Prior to the Hendrix version, the song had already been covered by British bands such as the Nashville Teens and the Alan Bound.
Must be some way out of here, said the joker to the thief. Businessmen, they drink my wine, plowmen dig my earth.
The Alan Bound opened for the Jimi Hendrix Experience on a couple of occasions, and according to bassist Noel Redding, Hendrix was so impressed by their cover that he decided to also give it a try and record his own version. The Hendrix version featured guest musicians such as Dave Mason from Traffic and Brian Jones from the Rolling Stones. Dave Mason played the 12-string acoustic guitar that can be heard throughout the song, while Brian Jones contributed the dry rattles featured in the intro, played on a vibraslap. Penny Valentine wrote,
In a week full of well-made but highly pleasant and therefore unshattering records, the Hendrix camp have managed perfect timing for release of this new single. Of course, we've had a long wait and, to be honest, maybe this sounded a great deal more shattering than it actually is, simply because it is something that woke me up from slumber. Anyway, it's good competent Hendrix stuff. Very tight and solid interpretation of the song Dylan wrote, and the Nashville Teens did a good job on. His fans will be eager to buy it.
The B-side was Long Hot Summer Night, another song which was also featured on Electric Ladyland. The single became a big hit, reaching number 5 and also becoming a top 10 hit in several European countries. In the States, the single reached number 20 according to Billboard, becoming Hendrix's highest-ranking American single and his only top 40 hit.
Do yourself a favor, count me in. Doesn't cost much more, and it's easy to win.
This single by Sharon Tandy is another highlight from October. The song had already been released as a B-side in 1967, and it featured Les Fleurs de Lis as her backing group.
I can help you hold on. Everything you do's wrong.
When the song was originally released in 1967, Atlantic Records felt the song was too abrasive and aggressive, so they decided to release it as a B-side. But by October 1968, music was getting increasingly heavier, and the label felt it was the right time to release the track as an A-side. The B-side was another killer rocker called Daughters of the Sun.
I'm a daughter of the sun. I'm a sister of the moon.
Record Mirror wrote,
When warmed up, as it were, Sharon really sells with a splendid sense of style. This one features voice over some really fiery instrumental sounds. Repetitive and quite a builder.
Unfortunately, the single didn't manage to make the charts, but both sides of the single have become massive cult favorites over the years, and this has become one of the most sought-after 45s from that period.
I'm the urban spaceman, baby, I've got speed. I've got everything I need.
October 1968 also saw the release of this single by the Bonzos. The Bonzos were known for combining music and comedy, and they could be described as the musical equivalent of Monty Python, and in fact, the group collaborated with Monty Python on several occasions. The single was produced by Paul McCartney, who was credited as Apollo C. Vermuth, a pseudonym he himself created. The B-side was an Elvis Presley parody, written and sung by Vivian Stanshall.
Across the mountains of your chest, I will stick a Union Jack.
Record Mirror wrote,
These boys are so good visually, but sometimes it is hard to get their particular sort of performance across on disc. If this doesn't make the charts, it'll get pretty near. A simple, catchy little thing with all those hoots and growls and booms and wadahs behind, and a wee surprise in the finale of the lyrics. The flip is a Bonzonian comedy deluxe.
I'm the Urban Spaceman became the group's biggest hit, reaching number 5 in Britain and remaining in the top 40 for several weeks. Later in the late 70s, Neil Innes played the role of Ron Nasty in the film The Ruttles, and he wrote all the songs from the movie's soundtrack. Another highlight from October 1968 was this excellent psychedelic single by a group called The Factory. Just like many psychedelic singles from that period, the record went pretty much unnoticed, but Path Through the Forest has become a massive cult classic over the years, and the song has been featured on several compilations of obscure psychedelic singles from the 60s. Nowadays, a copy of the single in mint condition is valued at over £700. The B-side was a cover of a song by Paul Revere and the Raiders. The single wasn't even reviewed by the press, and it didn't get any airplay, so inevitably, the record went unnoticed and was a flop. The A-side, however, was rediscovered later in the 80s, when it was featured on compilations of obscure British singles from the 60s, and as previously stated, the song has become a big cult favourite among enthusiasts of British psychedelia. One of the biggest British hits from October 1968 was this track by Barry Ryan. Eloise was written by Barry's twin brother Paul Ryan, and it's still remembered as a huge classic from the late 60s. The single got excellent reviews in the press.
There are those who knock all that Barry does, but their eyes will be wide open with amazement at the sheer magnificence of this production. It's a sort of pop symphony with a massive orchestra, a vocal group, a great set of Paul Ryan lyrics, and just about everything laid on with the grand touch. Barry's whole singing style has changed as well, soaring into the falsetto range and grinding out with even a bluesy edge. If there be justice, this will be a very big hit.
The song became a very big hit indeed. Eloise became a massive international smash, reaching number 1 in Britain and in several European countries such as France, Spain, the Netherlands, Belgium, Italy, Germany, and Switzerland. And it also became a number 1 hit in Australia and New Zealand. In the States, however, the single only managed to reach number 86 according to Billboard. The song charted again in Britain in 1986 when it was covered by The Damned, who managed to take the song to number 3. By October 1968, music was getting heavier, and this single by a British trio called The Gun is a good example of the sort of heavy rock sound that would eventually start to dominate the music scene in the late 60s and early 70s. Race with the Devil was also featured on the group's first album. The cover of the record is noteworthy, as it was the first by Roger Dean, who later became famous as the designer of album covers for groups such as Yes and Gentle Giant, among many others. The B-side was another good song which was also featured on the group's debut album. Record Mirror wrote,
"The group is new to me, but they settle into a commended aura of excitement, with great guitar figures and then a lead voice who builds instant impact. Can't be sure of this one's chances, but I have a feeling it will make it, although I'm not mad about the demoniacal laughing bits."
The single became a big success, reaching number 8 and remaining in the British charts for 10 weeks.
I got an insect bite me leg, sleeping on the beach last night. Had to have an injection, but I think it's alright now.
The first album by Blossom Toes, which was released in 1967, is one of the most underrated British psychedelic albums from that period. But unfortunately, the record wasn't a success. The album was included in Record Collector magazine's list of the 100 greatest psychedelic records. But despite the recognition, the record still remains fairly unknown, even among many fans of 60s psychedelia. This excellent single from October 1968 was the last gasp of the group in psychedelic mood.
When I go away, I like to send a postcard home, just to let my folks know that I'm alright.
One of your highly ingenious releases, and certainly a record of the week. It could even make the charts. It's offbeat and curiously arranged, with sort of throwaway lyrics in parts and full marks to producer Giorgio Gomelski.
The B-side was another good song which saw the band experimenting with jazz influences.
Everyone's leaving me now.
Despite the good reviews, however, the single didn't chart. Later in 1969, the group released their second record, which was also an excellent album. But at that point, the band had moved towards a heavier sound, and they had abandoned the psychedelic style that dominated their work from 1967 and 1968. October 1968 also saw the release of this great single by the Moody Blues. The A-side of the single had already been featured on the band's third album, which was released a few months before in July 1968. The B-side, however, was an excellent Mike Pinder composition that wasn't included on the album. Record Mirror wrote,
"Already a big hit in the States, this must be equally big here. It starts with a persistent sort of rhythm and then the voices come in, adamantly urgent. It's got style and professionalism, but it's also built on very commercial lines. In an admittedly funny old week for records, it's a decided standout, never lets up. The flip is a relaxation of pace and power, a very good number."
The single reached number 42 in Britain and number 61 in the States. The record reached its highest chart position in Canada, where it peaked at number 33. The Gods were one of those bands which featured several musicians who would achieve bigger success in 1969 and in the early 70s. The group went through several lineup changes over the years, but at different points in their career, the group featured musicians such as Future Stones guitarist Mick Taylor and Future King Crimson member Greg Lake. At this point in October 1968, the Gods were playing a mix of psychedelia and early progressive rock, and the group was formed by John Glasscock on bass and vocals, Joe Conus on guitar, and future Uriah Heep members Lee Kerslake on drums and Ken Hensley on guitar and keyboards. Record Mirror wrote,
New group launched with considerable fanfares, and this could so easily make it first time out. Whining guitar intro and directly into a chorus that seems eminently commercial. The vocal setup is extra strong, with the right blend of urgency and harmonies. Good guitar work as well. I think this'll grow on the nation.
Despite the good reviews, the single failed to chart.
Ooh, Tobacco Ash Sunday. You don't do me any good now.
Another great single from October 1968 was this 45 by a group called Harsh Reality. The group was formed in Hertfordshire in 1967, and this was the first of two singles that they released for Philips Records. The A-side, a song called Tobacco Ash Sunday, was an excellent track which seemed to merge soul music and psychedelia. The B-side was another excellent tune with a more progressive rock sound that was reminiscent of groups such as Procol Harum.
Can you look at me and tell me, now that we've become involved, that what was lost is love? Can this mystery be solved?
Later in 1969, Harsh Reality recorded their first and only album. The record, which was called Heaven and Hell, is now a highly sought-after rarity, selling for hundreds of pounds between eager collectors. The single didn't chart, but just like many 45s featured on these videos, both sides were rediscovered years later when they appeared on compilations of obscure British singles from the 60s. Later in the early 2000s, the A-side of the single was covered by Paul Weller.
Tobacco Ash Sunday.
Just like the previously mentioned album by Harsh Reality, the first and only album by July is another record which has become a truly valuable collector's item, exchanging hands on eBay or Discogs for thousands of pounds. The A-side of this single was a rather weak pop number which went completely unnoticed.
Hello, who's there? Hello, who's there? Hello.
The B-side, however, was a very good and very psychedelic track called The Way. The song had already been featured on the band's debut album, but this was a slightly different version of the track. The track was reminiscent of the sort of material that German bands such as Can would record later in the early 70s. The single was poorly promoted. It wasn't advertised in the press, and none of the major music papers even bother reviewing it. Despite getting some airplay on John Peel's radio show, the single didn't manage to make the charts.
Blue-eyed Buffalo Bill can't control his mind with a 6-shooting gun. Big trigger happy fingers snapping.
Another excellent and yet forgotten psychedelic track from October 1968 was this B-side by a group called Apple. The group was formed in Cardiff, and this was the first of two singles that they released for Page One, a record label that was founded by Larry Page. The A-side was a good catchy pop number.
Let's take a trip down the Rhine.
But the highlight here was definitely the B-side. Record Mirror wrote,
This is so darn catchy that it could easily make the charts, and it's a very good arrangement. Difficulty is over the name of the group, but they reckon they had their name before the Beatles set up a new organization. An offbeat sort of sound here most of the way, but certainly commercial. The flip is a slower mover initially with echo effects, and then a speed up.
Both sides of the single were featured on the group's debut album, which was released a few months later in February 1969. And just like the previously mentioned albums by Harsh Reality and July, The record is extremely hard to find and has also become a very valuable collector's item.
Means of intrusion, exploding galaxy.
This song, called Exploding Galaxy, is perhaps the most bizarre track from October. The song was a weird slice of over-the-top dramatic psychedelia, featuring a 40-piece orchestra and inspired by Beethoven's 7th Symphony Second Movement.
Matter is for molding, theories for holding, both parts interfolding, exploding galaxy.
Record Mirror wrote,
I must draw attention to this record of the weak piece of group ambitiousness. An adapted theme from a Beethoven symphony, if you please, and lyrics based on Hoyle's theory of the universe, if you further please. And it does come off.
The group was formed in the early 60s in Bournemouth as Tony Howard and the Dictators. In 1968, a businessman called Jonathan Wern offered to fund recording time and provide financial assistance for the group to buy new equipment. This offer seemed too good to be true, and in the fullness of time, proved correct. The recording sessions cost a ton of money, mostly due to the 40-piece orchestra that was featured on the song. And despite good reviews in the press, the single was a massive commercial failure. A few weeks later, back in Bournemouth, producer James Stevens informed the group that Jonathan Wern was a con man whose doomed get-rich-quick scheme backfired, setting off a chain reaction of bouncing checks all over London. The band was advised to return their newly acquired equipment immediately, and because of the mess left by their supposed benefactor, their new agent in London decided to drop them. It's certainly a cautionary tale for anyone thinking of entering the murky world of rock and roll.
'Cause it's so long ago, and the times have changed.
This track by the Piccadilly Line was a gorgeous psychedelic pop song that deserved to do much better than it did.
Sunday morning's here again. I don't know what I'll do.
This was the group's fourth and last 45. A year before, in 1967, the group recorded an LP called The Huge World of Emily Small, a brilliant slice of whimsical psychedelia. The single got good reviews in the press.
Certainly the most musicianly yet from a group who must be hovering near the big time and are certainly not underground. A clever song, well worded and well worth a spin.
Just like their previous 45s, the single didn't manage to make the charts.
And now, here's The Who with Magic Button.
I hope you enjoyed this trip back to 1968. See you next time.